California is projected to lose 3 seats, New York 2, also going to lose a seat, Minnesota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Illinois, all blue states. Who's getting these? Texas, Florida, Idaho, and Utah. I mean, this looks like game over.
So that was Bill Maher on his show Real Time with Bill Maher, discussing with Ezra Klein, who's been talking about Democratic regulations all of a sudden now that the Democrats have lost the election as a major problem for their party, discussing that many people are moving out of blue states in order to go to less regulatorily suppressive red states, because that's where the growth is, that's where the jobs are, and the country is essentially reorienting in that direction. And by some estimates for the 2030 census, it looks like most of these blue states are going to lose seats in favor of these red states growing, and it's absolutely disastrous from his point of view because he thinks it's game over for the Democrats, but he's about to find out it's actually significantly worse than he thinks. Now we're going to get into this, we're going to break this down, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
This is what reapportionment is on track to look like in 2030. Blue states like California and New York shedding House seats and electoral votes, and red states like Texas and Florida gaining 4 new electoral votes and House seats each. For an example of how much that could shift the map, in 2024, Donald Trump won a 312 to 226 victory in the Electoral College. Under this projection, the exact same state and vote breakdown would swell that margin by 20 electoral votes to 322 to 216.
So look, as you guys should know at this moment in time, congressional allocation is done based on population. So if you have more people in your state, you get more seats in Congress. And when a state is growing slower than another state or is losing population, that ultimately ends up resulting in them losing a seat. And of course, your congressional seats end up adding into your electoral votes. So this has dramatic implications for presidential elections. And the Democrats are in major trouble based on what Bill Maher has outlined, because they're about to lose a bunch of seats coming up in 2030, which means regardless of how the 2028 election turns out, it looks like it's going to be much harder for them to win the presidency. Now, to be clear, many of the states listed are not actually losing population. They're just growing significantly slower than other states like Texas or Florida, which, by the way, could be indicative of the same thing as why states are losing population. Because if you're not attracting the new young workforce, the highly productive workers that are seeking out jobs, that are willing to move for a job like California historically did or New York historically did, that is a reason why you're growing slower than a place like Texas or Florida or all these different various red states that are set to pick up a massive amount of congressional seats. And by the way, the trajectory is clear. Regardless of California losing or becoming a net loser of population growth in their state overall like they did for a couple of years, Texas is growing at such a faster rate that in our lifetimes it will likely be the most populated state in the union. Now, Bill and Ezra have come to the conclusion that part of this is about taxes and regulations, and he ends up discussing him trying to hook up solar power to his own home as an example of this.
You know, and the reason why people are voting with their feet is a lot of what your book is about.
Yeah.
Taxes and regulation. I certainly been screaming about it forever. I did 3 years with a sign here that said, how long is it going to take me to get my solar hooked up? 3 years. Talking about it on television in this state. You couldn't do it. This state has almost 400,000 regulations. I just put in a new roof because the fire, I thought, oh, let's get a roof that's not going to burn up. 2 inspections. Why are you inspecting my roof? It's my roof. If it falls on me, that's my problem. And we're taxed more than any other state. People are leaving these kind of states for places where they're not, they feel the heavy breath of government on them. It's not that hard.
Look, I think obviously that this is a big reason why people are moving. Also, the price of housing is extraordinarily high in a lot of these blue states, again, due to the regulatory burden. But the fact that Bill Maher points out that as a rich person on television, talking about how he can't get his solar hooked up because he can't get the proper inspections, it still took him 3 years. just goes to show you how insane California is. And remember, this is a state that wants people to go green, that wants to crack down on fossil fuels, and it takes them 3 years to approve of somebody getting off fossil fuels, getting off the grid, going to solar power, because that's how insane their system is. You got to do all these impact studies and all these different various inspections and whatnot in order to get anything done in the state of California, even the stated goal in the state of California.
But let's talk about what's important. My roof.
Your roof.
My roof.
Is this the solar? Is this, we're back to the solar?
After the fire.
It's always about the solar.
After the fire.
Yes, Bill.
New roof. They suggested, get the stuff that's not, okay. 2 inspections I needed to have. Why? It's my roof. If it falls on my head, that's my problem.
That's it?
That's it.
That's just a statement.
No, that's my question. Why do I need 2 inspections, which I have to pay for?
Yeah.
When you were here last time, we talked about regulations. You said, oh, it's a completely new day.
Well, no, wait.
It's a quote from you. Completely new day.
Well,
You said you were working on it.
By the way, and last week you had Ezra Klein on, which was incredibly important. He wrote a book called Abundance, which really lays out a very condemning picture of liberal governance in this country and the fact that we are process-focused and not outcome-focused. And you're a demonstrable example of that as relates to what you've tried to do with your damn roof for the last 15 years. And so it's our job to eliminate as many of those thickets
How's that going, though?
as possible.
And what's crazy about this is when you compare it to a state like Texas, you realize that they don't give a damn about green energy, but it's flourishing way more there than it is in California.
So we poll this. They're leaving on cost of living. That's all part of it. They're leaving because they can't afford homes. And it's a huge, not just political problem, those numbers you just gave. After 2030, if that holds, a Democrat could win every state Kamala Harris won, win Michigan, win Pennsylvania, and I'm just blanking on the third blue wall state, win Michigan, win Pennsylvania, and win Wisconsin, and lose the presidential election, right? The blue wall would no longer be enough for them to win. And you have to take that.
You mean they could win those 3 states and still
lose the presidential. That's how bad it is, right?
Wow.
And that's because they are driving people out, working class families out of the states they govern, because the cost of living is too high. And the cost of living is too high in part for regulatory reasons, in part for taxes. But the big problem is they just don't have enough of the things people need. Not enough homes, not enough energy.
Again, they're talking about this as a devastating consequence, as an absolutely horrible thing to happen in the United States of America. But I think to myself, cool. That sounds awesome. That sounds amazing. We had all these different various people who were talking about how demographics were our destiny. The changing demographics in the United States of America were going to lead to the Democrats winning every election ever. And by the way, while changing demographics are definitely a part of the Democratic strategy, it looks like they played themselves, because what's actually happening is the demographics are going to change in favor of the Republicans. People are fleeing these blue states for better governed, lower regulatory and lower tax requirements that they find in red states. It's absolutely amazing that the exact thing that they thought post-Obama was going to lock in their presidential chances from now until the end of time is going to be their undoing. Now, of course, this can cause some realignment in the American political system. We all understand that. The lack of importance of those blue wall Rust Belt states is obviously going to have an impact on how much they're campaigned in and whatnot, because as Ezra Klein pointed out, everything that Kamala Harris won plus those 3 states aren't going to be enough in order to secure a Democrat a presidential victory. So it's about to get significantly worse if those local governments don't reform, because you're not even going to have the flood of promised federal dollars into those areas anymore, because there's no need to pander to those voters to win a presidential election.
You were talking about your solar sign. California high-speed rail, it's a huge disaster, but nobody's ever done anything about it. If you tried to build it again, it would go the exact same way.
High-speed rail?
Yeah, California's high-speed rail.
I think we first passed it in 2008. Mm-hmm. I think they just voted about something about it again. It's projected. Just give up. Just to build. I think from Bakersfield to Merced. Who the hell wants to go from Bakersfield to Merced? And they couldn't do that.
I went out and toured this one. And the people building it were perfectly clear with me. Look, this doesn't work if we don't do LA to San Francisco. And they don't have the money to do LA to San Francisco. And they don't have the regulatory structure to do it. They have been they started clearing the rail track through environmental review. The whole point of high-speed rails is good for the environment.
Right.
They started clearing it through environmental review in 2012. By the end of 2024, when I was fact-checking the book, it was almost done. The reviews were almost done. And the thing that bothers me about it, in addition to we didn't get high-speed rail, is they didn't change it.
They end up bringing up the California high-speed rail disaster, which again is a disaster that we just heard an additional update about. That's absolutely makes the project even worse. Essentially, this is going to open in 2045 or something of the sort, some ridiculous far off date. Its estimated cost has ballooned to $130 billion, and they just announced that if they don't get $7 billion in extra money by next year, then they won't be able to do anything with it. Now, of course, you compare and contrast that to Florida, and I talked about this in a previous video, so I won't waste too much of your time. Their Bright Line from Orlando to Miami, that ended up costing $5 billion. It ended up taking 4 years to build. It required no federal subsidies. It was done by a private company, and guess what? It's operational right now. Meanwhile, California, it takes over 12 years to nearly complete the environmental study program, so that maybe you could think about filing for your other studies and your other processes in order to maybe consider at some point in the future breaking ground on this particular project. It's absolutely crazy how these Democrats govern their states, and it's no wonder why people are shifting so dramatically to the red states, voting with their feet in order to go there, and why certain states that we thought were going to become purple like Texas or were purple like Florida have turned out to be solid red states. Year after year of good Republican governance, seeing the examples of terrible Democratic governance has essentially locked in these states even more. We have demographics that were kind of floating a little bit like Latinos, shifting even harder in that direction, and it's hard to ignore this trend unless, of course, you're a Democrat in one of these states in which you're thinking of new ways and new regulations in order to add.
The problem with a bunch of the red states is the vision of where they want to go with things, right? The fascinating thing to me about Texas is it's building as much clean energy as it is, even though the politics are anti-clean energy. The Texas governor, the Texas legislature, they keep putting up bills to make it harder, but because the default in Texas is it's easy to build, and building clean energy is profitable because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the technology and a bunch of other things, they're still building a ton of it.
So this is another reason why I can't end up supporting the Democratic Party, even if you agreed with their goals, even if you were obsessed with clean energy, and for whatever reason, you don't think about nuclear energy as the obvious solution. If you want something that works, that's actually low carbon or no carbon in the case of nuclear, the fact is they cannot even achieve the goals that they set out, and Republican states that don't give a damn about those goals are better at doing so. So because of Texas's regulatory environment, wind and solar and all these different energies are flourishing over there in comparison to the rest of the country, because the default is to build, even though in Texas, they don't want to give all these subsidies to these different energy companies. Although I will point out that wind energy is over-subsidized in the state of Texas, and that's a major problem. That's a major issue that they should cut out. But the fact is, it's not nearly to the degree promoted by politicians as a state like California or New York, and yet they're building more of it, and yet they're producing more of it, because again, the default setting in Texas is to build. And a perfect example of this is that in many states in the union, you have regulatory codes at the state level that incentivize more rules at the local level, more restrictions. But in Texas, guess what? They have a maximum cap from the state level that you cannot go over. So you cannot actually pass more zoning regulations than what the state has on the books, which requires even the blue cities that are notorious for over-regulating their housing environments to go in the other direction. That's why Austin ended up deregulating their zoning code even more, and that ultimately ended up leading to rents falling. Again, you have major cities in Texas that are the fastest growing metropolises in the country, the top 5 or literally number 1, as Austin was a few years ago and Dallas-Fort Worth area is now, where rents are falling, where supply is actually meeting demand. Meanwhile, when population is reducing and rents are skyrocketing in New York City and in California, you still can't build anything. You still can't do anything, and somehow rents are still going up. It's absolutely insane. And a lot of people want to blame illegal immigrants. And yes, artificially increasing the demand with this alien population does in fact impact rent prices. We all understand that. But the fact is, there's a lot of illegal immigrants that are in the state of Texas. It's right on the border with Mexico, just like it's right on the border border with California. But the thing is, if you have a regulatory environment that is conducive to building, you can far more mitigate those consequences as compared to California, as compared to other blue states and blue jurisdictions, because that's what we see repeatedly. And by the way, Florida isn't even rated that well for builders in terms of its regulatory code, but even though they have rules, they're simple and straightforward. In New York, the permitting process is crazy. It's insane. You need a million different inspections all the time. The same is true in Chicago and all these different left-wing places that just stack rule after rule after rule on top of it. And that's really one of the things that's just driving people away. You can't do business there. You can't live there. The rents are too high. And all politicians do is vote for more rules and more restrictions to make the problems worse. I mean, how many times have you been promised affordable housing by a Democrat in your lifetime? And what do they always end up doing? Subsidizing the demand side of housing. Or sometimes they'll build a building, it takes forever, the costs go way over, and then they end up artificially suppressing the rents in some of the apartments for some people, the lucky people who win the lottery in that regard, but that ends up leading to the other rents having to go up to compensate, which ends up driving up the overall cost of rent. Again, we have all these schemes in New York City, we have them in San Francisco, I see them all the time across the country, and guess what? All of those schemes for affordable housing, all the politicians who run on and propose big bills for affordable housing, they all preside over states and municipalities where housing always goes up. You never hear about affordable housing and all these schemes and projects that are being built in red states because they just let the market build and then rents go down. It's not that complicated, people. The places with the most rent control in this country have the highest rents. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. They have the most regulated and rent-controlled apartments in the entire country, and guess what? The rent's the highest there. New York City has a population of 8 million people. 1 million of the apartments plus are under rent control or rent stabilization. One apartment for every 8 residents is artificially suppressed below market value, and if that led to rents going down, we would have seen that already because we've been doing this crap since the 40s. It does the opposite. We see it time and time again, and yet these politicians continuously run on this nonsense. So yeah, Republican states don't have these problems in large. Some of them do, obviously. Some of them are addicted to zoning, let's be clear about that, but in comparison, they're not as big of an issue, and when they do come up, like in Florida, but population growth is a thing, they roll back the regulations in order to make it easier to build, because that's the goal, to get more people there, more business there, more revenue there, because they're actually interested in growth rather than managing the decline. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Bill Maher admitting that it's over. Till next time.